Hello, everyone, and welcome to Capitol Watch for Friday, March 8th, our weekly look at legislative developments from the state capitol. And joining us from our Jefferson City offices is our Associate Executive Director for Advocacy and Chief Lobbyist, Mike Reed. And Mike, one of the big issues this past week was some Senate action on a rather massive tax cut bill. Tell us about that.
A lot of work this week on the Senate tax cut bill. It's a huge tax cut. There are some tax increases in it, but it is a huge tax cut, questionably between $450 million and $900 million as a shortfall in the taxes of the state of Missouri. It reduces income taxes. It is a shift, a tremendous shift in the way that we are funding government in the state of Missouri. Very, very, very important piece of legislation.
And one of the key sponsors on the Senate side is Senator Will Kraus from Lee's Summit, and he spoke about that bill on the floor of the Senate. Let's take a look now at his comments.
Mr. President, I want to start by thanking everyone that has worked with me on this bill. We're not to the end yet, but I know it's been a long process, and I've had many meetings over this trying to get to a resolution that I know that there's people that have problems with this, and we've tried to work them out. But I first want to thank everybody for working this far on it. And I know we got a little ways to go, so I do appreciate all the work of the members on the Ways and Means Committee. And with that, I want to explain this sub is different, but very similar to the previous sub. Let me go over each part in it. It's thick, primarily. I'll tell you why in a second. The first thing that we need to know is it reduces individual personal income tax by 1 point or 1% from 6% to 5%, and it does it over a 5-year process. And it also takes 1 point or 1% on the corporate income tax down over a 5-year process.
And Mike, while those tax cuts may not seem like a lot the way Senator Kraus is describing them, as you mentioned, they really will put a huge hole in the state budget, won't they?
They will, according to even the senator's own situation and what he has said, that he said that it will be a hole of $450 million. This is a difference in philosophy. The supporters believe that by cutting taxes, it will spur growth and people will spend more money, and then we will make up that hole through sales tax. When Jim Moody spoke to us in February, he showed that really has never worked before. So we're very, very hesitant to believe that these cuts will be made up in our sales taxes. The other question is where are we going to go, and is this the best way to do it? This is one of the things is a response to the cuts that are made in Kansas, and there's a feeling in the city of Kansas City and along western Missouri that a number of industries and businesses will go to Kansas because of the lower taxes in the state of Kansas, and that we'll lose out on a number of situations and a number of businesses, people going. I'm not sure this is the best thing to do, is that we try to out Kansas by cutting taxes the way that they did. The race to the bottom following Kansas has never been something that I've thought that is the most appropriate thing to do for government. But as Senator Kraus said, this is a process, and it is a process that's still ongoing. That did have it was perfected. So the next vote is a third reading vote in the Senate and moving on to the House. The Senate still has to figure out exactly how much this is going to cost, and it's really going to be interesting to see where the cost figures come in from the Senate staff. But it's very troublesome because there is only certain places that can be cut in state government. We've had some assurances that, they will try to keep, the people who write the budget will try to keep education from being cut. But where do you cut? Do you cut mental health? Do you cut corrections? Do you cut Medicaid? There are only just so much money in the pot. So it's very, very troubling. And I think our members need to be aware and need to talk to their senators to say, what happens if there is even a $450 million cut in the state budget, because we have still not funded the formula. We're $500 million under the formula right now. There is only so much money, and if we keep taking away and making sure that businesses, which we want to grow in the state of Missouri, we're not anti-business, but we are pro-students, and we believe the best growth for business in the state of Missouri is an educated workforce. And the way you educate a workforce is you spend the money to educate the children.
And Mike, assuming this bill does get through the Senate and moves over to the House side, is there support for it on the House side in your view?
There's a tremendous amount of support on the House side. I believe that it gets through the Senate, it gets through the House very quickly. Then it's up to the governor. The governor has stated that he will veto this piece of legislation. So it looks like it may come down to a big fight between the governor and the General Assembly, and we'll see what happens.
So obviously a major issue for us during this legislative session, and we'll certainly be keeping our members up to date on this legislation as it moves through the Senate and the House. Another issue that came up this week, Mike, a couple of hearings actually, on the issue of Common Core state standards. What happened there?
Yeah, the Common Core state standards were established a number of years ago by the Governors Association and the Council of School Executives, which is the heads of all of the state school boards throughout the United States. They are some standards that were looked upon to make sure that everyone is testing for at least at the same levels, or trying to find out exactly where we are, so we can compare ourselves from one state to the other. These standards we have been working on these standards for more than 2 years in the state of Missouri. But now there is a group of people in the legislature who feel that they have not been consulted on this and are looking at this to try to do away with these Common Core standards. Actually, we have been working on them, as I said, for more than 2 years. That train left the station 2 years ago. We have put this in our federal waiver. And in fact, if we move away from the Common Core standards and off our federal waiver, we have a possibility of losing federal funds. It's an interesting concept. I think what we need is more communication between DESE and the legislature to where we are. As happens often, sometimes we get so involved we don't keep everybody informed. Perhaps that's part of the case. I would hope that cooler heads prevail and we can spend some time informing people of what are the Common Core standards, what are they not. Let's cut through the propaganda on both sides and figure out exactly how they affect the state of Missouri. But what we're really trying to do is making sure that what is best for our students and for the students in the state of Missouri, and to hold them to certain standards. And that's not all wrong.
Early childhood education, Mike, is another issue we continue to follow, and there was some action on that piece of legislation in the Senate Education Committee this week. Tell us about that.
Yes, Senate Education sent out Senator Kevney's bill on early childhood education, which is funding early childhood education through the foundation formula. It's a start of the conversation to say, what are we going to do about early childhood education? Because it has been shown that money spent through those early years, through those pre-K years, is the best money spent in public education. So it's very, very important, and let's have this conversation. Yes, it cuts into the formula, but it may help us in the end. So let's try to figure out how we can prepare students to come into the first grade, kindergarten, the first grade, and be ready to learn.
Another issue that was heard this week, Mike, has to do with virtual schools and the ability of students to take virtual courses in a school district other than their home district. What's that all about? That's
correct. And it's very, very important to understand that we support virtual education. We support MOVIP, the virtual education program in the state of Missouri. We support students taking virtual classes, and we are working with our members in making sure that the virtual classes are out there for our students. This bill is really an open enrollment bill, and it takes money from the districts and pays for virtual classes for students who have never been enrolled in public education. Homeschool kids, private school kids, it allows them to tap into the formula money and to take virtual education courses, and we're paying for kids that we have never had, in our base, in our group that we're paid for. So it's an open enrollment bill, taking foundation formula money, going to private contractors. Bottom line, it's about the money. We are in favor of virtual education. I want everybody to understand that. But this piece of legislation is not the best piece of legislation for that.
Something else that occurred in Jefferson City this week, Mike, not over at the state capitol, but across the street at the Missouri Supreme Court, an important hearing on a case involving the ability of students in unaccredited school districts to transfer to neighboring school districts, a law that's been in place now for some time. And we're looking for some resolution on that issue from the state Supreme Court, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We're looking for some guidance from the state Supreme Court on how that happens. It's, again, who's responsible for paying for students from unaccredited districts to accredited districts when they move? Who's responsible for that? And must the accredited districts take every student from an unaccredited district, even though the classes get too big and it might increase to such an extent that we can become overcrowded in the receiving districts? The students in the unaccredited districts have every right to expect an education. There is no question. The students in the receiving districts have every right to expect an education and not to be overcrowded. It's a tough question, and it's been before the court once. It's now back in front of the court again, and needs to be decided because there are unaccredited districts, and who is responsible for paying, who is responsible for receiving those districts, and what happens with the students in the receiving districts.
All right, Mike, as we look ahead to next week, I guess, again, one of the big issues will be the final Senate vote on the tax cut bill. Anything else coming up next week?
That's probably going to be the big amount of work that we're working on. Well, we're working on a lot of things, but that's going to be a major situation, is the tax cut bill. And I want all of our members to read what we're sending out. We talked about this for the last several weeks, about this bill that was out there. All of a sudden, it got a lot of momentum in the earlier this week and started moving through. So that's going to be a big push. I want to make sure that people come to the SBAN that we're having this week. This is the last week before legislative spring break. A lot of work will be going in this week. The budget is still being worked upon. There'll be a lot of work on that, as well as other pieces of legislation. Hopefully, we will be having a hearing this week on our bonding bill to increase the bonding capacity from 15% to 25% upon a vote of the people. So a lot of work this week.
All right, Mike Reed, as always, thanks a lot for being with us, and we'll be keeping you up to date as the busyness in the legislature really is starting to pick up here during the middle of the legislative session. Be sure to read our Legislative Voice newsletter we send to you in your email every Friday, our daily updates on our website, and of course this program. And we hope you join us again next week for another edition of MSBA's Capitol Watch.